Uh, Steve says, for a brief moment, I read that as David Lynch to Dog Days. Uh,
Very different kind of game.
very, very different
It's
game
not
that would
really
have
one you
been.
play with controllers. You receive 2 mushrooms in the mail, and you place your hands in.
Oh yeah, shit, forgot about that. You already warned me too, about having to make sure that the it doesn't launch into the trailer.
Yeah, you press enter there, and then it goes to the main menu.
Right. That's what I'm doing right now. Anyway, um, I think it's fair to say that this game holds a very special place in both of our hearts. Uh, it is flawed, and it is definitely. It's very understandable why it never got a third game. um,
Yeah, we could.
but it's. Yeah, what were we gonna say?
Yeah, we could definitely cover why IO Interactive never came back to Halo Legends. You and me liked it a lot, and some of our friends really liked watching it, and no one else, as it turns out, cared for it.
Yeah, it tried to do something that was a really cool idea, and not a whole lot of people really resonated with it. It's kind of tragic too, because if it had just been a little bit of a better game or like a less generic game when it came to its actual like shooting, I feel like maybe people would have gotten a little bit further with it, because it's not a bad game mechanically. Like, it's a little frustrating at points, and it certainly has a lot of bugs here and there.
It's very simple.
But yeah, no, it's pretty simple in terms of its actual combat.
For 2010.
Yeah, for 2010, yeah. That being said, when did Resident Evil 5 come out?
Pretty sure RE5 was before this.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like if this game had been as good as like RE5, like we would.
Yeah, RE5 was the year before 2009.
Yeah.
That is one of the best co-op experiences crafted in the video game medium.
I know, but you see my point though. Is like that. There's a parallel universe perhaps where this was, in addition to being stylistically a masterpiece, was actually like a masterpiece in gameplay, and then we would probably be on like Kane and Lynch, 6 or something by this point.
I think the universe where Kane and Lynch succeeds is where it's not it's where it's not inspired by heat, but more follows like the V for Dishonored's genre, kind of the immersion sim. As opposed to the running and gutting, it's more, say, like setting up a heist and then executing it with some kind of gadgetry or something, and then very little actual combat unless things go awry.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I was reading up on the game earlier today in preparation for this, and I saw that there had briefly been a tactics game planned set in this universe. It was going to be a Nintendo DS game, and I don't think it got like anywhere in development. Like, it had never even been formally announced, but like it was revealed sometime after the fact that had been like talked about behind the scenes.
Was that after Kane and Lynch 2?
I don't know. I think presumably it was around the time that the second one was being made that they were thinking about it.
Between those. Let's say 2020. Or yeah, I guess the 3DS was 2011 or something like that. So yeah, the DS wasn't quite out at that point. It still had millions of people playing it, so you could just throw something out and made some money on it.
And it's easy to forget, but I was starting to remember as I looked up the game again that they pushed the first game really hard. Like, there was an absolute marketing blitz for it. Like, I remember going on IGN, and like all the banners and the side, the background of the website was Kane and Lynch 1 stuff. Kane and Lynch Dead Men, I guess that was. And it's crazy to think it wasn't just that they had a marketing push, but they pushed the idea of turning this into like a multimedia franchise, because not that long after the first game, they announced like there was like a movie had been greenlit, and they had already gotten like Bruce Willis and Jamie Foxx signed on to play Kane and Lynch respectively.
There's like that comic out for Kane and Lynch as well.
There was.
A couple of issues.
Yeah. And I just remember thinking that was crazy at the time, because I was just like, man, like, for one thing, there weren't that many video game movies that were especially coming out during that time, because most video game movies had not been a success. But I think they were banking on the idea that this wouldn't really be a video game movie, such as it would be like, here's these two really grabbing characters that we can stage this, you know, action crime movie about.
Here's our big homage to Heat.
Yeah, probably. And yeah, like, I remember thinking the casting, I was like, well, I mean, those are both good actors, and I'm sure they could, you know, they could carry a duo movie, a sort of buddy movie. And I think, so, I remember all of that about, you know, when Kane and Lynch 1 first came out. I never played the first one. I have never even touched it.
Eyeballed it a bit, and it doesn't seem especially worth going back to.
Right, that's what I've heard. I've heard it's, you know, not bad, just sort of generic and didn't really do that much in particular. But for our purposes, it is interesting to point out that from what I do know of that first game, this game is very different. They tried to do something very, very different with how it is presented, and I really wish that people had resonated with what they tried to do as much as we did.
Yeah, but it's very. I'm trying to think of like what fucked up crime stuff was going on at that point. Because Kane Lynch is definitely from like the. Oh, it's kind of a weird thing where it's like as though the characters from Heat like kept getting older and worse in their lives and became more and more ramshackle, right? As opposed to just getting murdered or dead.
Yeah, like they're two really, really tough dudes, and they somehow manage to like barely survive all the shit that's thrown at them.
Like tough in the sense of like a sack of broken cinder blocks is tough. Like you'd hurt your hand.
Right, exactly.
But it's not exactly well. They're not exactly well constructed. They're just sort of alive.
Yeah, no, they survive through like a sheer kind of malignant force of will. These two protagonists are kind of interesting in terms of anti-heroes because there's not really a whole lot that's likable about them. They're kind of just both pieces of shit. They're like we empathize with them because they're the protagonists, so they are trying to improve their lives, I guess, is like the best thing that can be said about them, is that they, but at the same time, like, they don't really take any positive. They don't go out of their way to like harm civilians, I guess, is really the only good thing you could say about them. But at the same time, they don't particularly care if civilians get caught in the crossfire of their, you know, their shootouts. It's just kind of like a regrettable inconvenience, if anything.
Yeah.
So in terms of a lot of, you know, criminal anti-heroes that we play as in video games,
they have no
I'd say
redeeming qualities.
Yeah, they're not like Nathan Drake, you know, who's like a charismatic rogue who steals stuff from bad people and whatnot. Like, Kane and Lynch mostly kill bad people.
That's
mostly.
Just bad people are in their way.
Yeah, bad people are trying to kill them, so they kill bad people. Like,
it's mostly just who they interact with.
Yeah.
Blasting cops.
Yeah, and most of the cops, we are told, are corrupt cops, you know, who are on the take and whatnot and working for crime syndicates.
Military coup or whatever going on.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that part of the game. But I guess before we begin, let's talk a little bit about. So for those of you who have not seen much of this game, right from the very beginning of the first reveal trailer, they showed that they were going to try something visually very, very different, which is that the entire thing is like a found footage video game, in the sense.
Before really good phone cameras, but when phone cameras were getting popular.
Right, exactly. So that like it came out at this really interesting intermediate era of like, now suddenly everyone has the ability to record video at every time, but like it's not necessarily going to be very high quality. And so there's like a weird multi-layer meta narrative to the entire game, which is that like you're watching
Like
the
collected footage of people around the path Kane and Lynch cut through.
exactly, that like it is implied, almost from what I remember, it's implied at a couple parts that there is like an actual cameraman who is following them around. Like blood will get on the camera, and like water will be on the camera's lens.
Yeah, the camera following them gets into places that make no sense for there to be regular people sitting around filming them after a certain point.
Yeah. And so at a certain point, it doesn't really make any sense that there would be a character there, like as the actual cameraman, like an unseen character. But at the same time, it does seem at certain points that there is. But I like what you said about it's the collected footage, because the real meta narrative above that is that you're watching the police reconstruct what has happened over the course of this period of time after the fact. That like you're almost playing as like a forensic investigator who is reviewing this footage, and or not, if not a forensic investigator, maybe like a prosecutor or some kind of, you know,
Some kind of data analyst. Or something.
yeah,
Going through, marking who's hit, who's shot, who's fatally shot.
right, because when you hit someone, there's a hit marker that is like as if someone is reviewing the footage, and yeah, to establish a body count is like, okay, and at this point in the footage, you can see that this gangster was killed. And yeah, so there'll be like little hit markers and whatnot. One of the things, like, people's faces will be blurred out to protect their identities or to censor extreme violence. And when we get to that part in the game where that stuff starts to happen, we'll point it out, of course. And that's, I remember when we first played this, that was something that really struck me. That they, like, when you shoot someone in the head, their face will be blurred to imply that their head is now horribly, you know, blown apart, and that you don't want to see it. And as someone who by this point, you know, had played several violent video games, and I was like, all right, you know, I know about the violence in the video games. I can take that kind of stuff. It was jarring, to say the least, when that happened.
Reality to the violence.
It does. It lends, exactly. It makes it a lot less, you just shot some, you know, random NPC, and a lot more like, oh, like, that's a dead person, and we don't want to see it. Yeah, like it is, it really, like I said, kind of a found footage, like, that this is, in the universe of Kane and Lynch, like, people who are into gore probably, like, watch their videos, you know, that they're,
There are wrecked threads on Reddit or whatever.
right, exactly, wrecked threads, you know,
Observing
probably
the
about,
violence and doing unmentionable acts while watching it.
right, and the thing about, we'll get there too later, as you'll see at a certain point in the game.
Not much later. The game's pretty short.
No, the game's pretty short, but that there's a certain point in the campaign where the action escalates beyond just like criminal shootout to something much, much bigger than that, to the point where it would be like global news. Like the entire world would be like hearing about the stuff that happened in this game, which is interesting to think about, because you think about a lot of crime games. Most of the time it's like, oh, a heist happened, you know, and probably it was like a big news story in that universe. Like, some stuff happens in this game where it was probably a very big deal.
I think if Kane Lynch played out, it would be a much larger global problem as it's presented in this game. Whereas
Right.
because they do a lot. They do a lot.
Yes,
on
they
the
do.
path to get out of the problems they themselves caused. Yep.
All right. So let's on that bombshell, let's do some online co-op. Host private game. Okay. Invite. How do I get you? Hold on a second. It just auto launched.
I joined on you. Let's see what it does.
Oh, nice. You did. All right. Fantastic.
I'm gonna stop and start the recording real quick so it's easy to break.
Yeah, that's a good idea.